What is up, guys? Eric here from Real Film Reviews, bringing you another movie review, this time for the new Ryan Reynolds film, The Hitman's Bodyguard. The Hitman's Bodyguard is directed by Patrick Hughes, stars Ryan Reynolds and Samuel L. Jackson, and tells the story of an international assassin portrayed by Jackson, who decides that he wants to testify in international court against a sort of evil, murderous leader from the former Soviet Union. He's the only witness that seems to be able to get this guy convicted, otherwise he's going to walk free. So Reynolds is not the first choice, but he is who ends up being the one that has to take Jackson to Amsterdam to testify, and of course all kinds of funny, crazy stuff happens, and we get a very fun buddy comedy for the summer. Now, I think Hughes, as director, actually handled the action of this film pretty well. Most of the shootout sequences are done in a good manner. I would say the driving sequences suffer a little more, but we'll get to that later. For the most part, though, the action is solid, and it has a decent, realistic vibe. Even though Jackson is pretty old, Hughes was able to handle that in a good way, utilizing stunt doubles at certain times, but also having Jackson do some of his stunts, so it still felt real. Reynolds, on the other hand, of course, did a ton of his stunts, and absolutely sold every single action sequence that he was in. Jackson and Reynolds also, of course, had really fun chemistry with each other on screen. The script for this movie is pretty funny, and I enjoyed the fact that it wasn't overly funny. It wasn't trying too hard. It had jokes placed properly in places where they made sense. They weren't just sort of all over the place. And I thought that that was really good. So I thought the two of them worked well in that sense. Jackson being sort of the more like wild stallion, while Reynolds is the more, here are the rules, this is how we're gonna do this thing, and that mesh sort of worked really well. It's sort of the classic like odd couple comparison, except for in this case one's a hitman and the other one's a bodyguard, which is kind of what makes it more funny. Oldman played a pretty solid villain, I guess. He doesn't have really a ton to do in the movie. I thought he sold what he did have to do, sort of shades of his villain character from Air Force One with Harrison Ford, in that he's an evil Russian guy who wants to do some things. He doesn't really have a ton of screen time, but he's Gary Oldman, so of course he sold the role and did good in every scene he was in, and you hated him because you knew he was a bad guy, and that's really all he needed to do for this film. The story did also have some twists and turns. It wasn't all just extremely straightforward, which was good, although most of the twists and turns were pretty easy to figure out or see coming. I still did like the fact that they were there, because it added a little bit more depth to the story, a little bit more depth to the characters involved in it, and it just sort of helped make the movie feel a little less cliche. Because honestly, that's one of the biggest issues with this film, is that it has quite a few cliche moments that are things that you've seen in movies time and time again, and while sometimes they do put a funny twist on them, there are other times where it's pretty generic, and it's not necessarily going to ruin the movie, but it just sort of makes it feel a little less special, and the big part of that is that they kind of have love stories play a really, really big role in this film, and while some of them do have fun aspects to them, a lot of it feels, I don't want to say it's all forced, but there are scenes that feel forced, and there are moments that feel unnecessary, and it felt like they should have focused more on the relationship between Reynolds and Jackson at times, rather than their separate relationships with people. And then, as I said before, while the shootout action sequences are handled pretty well, the driving sequences, which there are quite a few chases in this movie, some of them are good. And there's really one particular one that is kind of overly edited. There's a lot of quick cuts. At times, it's really hard to sort of place yourself in the scene as to what you're seeing in relation to what else is going on, which that is always the biggest issue with fast editing, is sometimes you sort of just get lost in it, and you don't know what's really going on or what you're seeing or how this character is in this place in relation to this thing. And that did happen in one particular scene in this film, and it was a rather important scene. So I didn't really like that, and I wish that they would have handled the car chase sequences the same way that they had handled the shootout sequences in the film, because the shootouts, for the most part, were all good. You're always going to have a few scenes that maybe are a little overly edited, but nothing too crazy, but this one particular driving scene was definitely overdone at times. I'm going to give The Hitman's Bodyguard a C+. This movie isn't really anything that crazy special, but you have two fun stars that have a good time on screen together to give you some laughs and some cool action sequences. It really is just a very fitting sort of buddy comedy summer film that's a good time if you go with a bunch of friends to the theater, so that's where I'd recommend it. But as always, guys, if you enjoyed this video, please do like, subscribe, comment down below what you thought of The Hitman's Bodyguard, share everything we do here on Real Film Reviews, and I hope to see you guys later.